I feel like my story and my history is in Mauritius, right? So we are in a time in history where Mauritius is developing a lot. And I feel like I want to be part of this history.
The thing that I find scary is the future is here already. We're already seeing some of the effects of it. So does it scare you? Hi everyone, I've got a small favor to ask. I know that many of you have been watching these conversations over the past couple of years with people who inspire. It would mean a lot to us and it would help us continue to have these conversations if you would just subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
One of the reasons I decided to invite you is I did a poll recently on LinkedIn on what kind of profiles people wanted to hear about. And so many people reached out to me and said, we don't hear enough about young people. All your guests are middle-aged and above. And we want to hear about the youth. We want to hear about what they think. We want to know about what motivates them, what inspires them. Hence my invite to you. So thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I mean, I hope I'm still youth. I know it's 18 to 24. I'm 25 now. So yeah.
Very much so. I usually ask this question towards the end of the interview, but I wanted to ask you as a first question, because when I was reading your bio, I was really impressed by it to have someone, a young person, so passionate about what he does. So I was going to ask you, what do you think your mission in life is?
Okay, so we start like this. Good. That's a really good question, you know. My mission in life, I don't know, I've been thinking about it quite a lot. I wish I could have, you know, a one and done answer and be like, okay, this is my life and I want to do this. I think I know what I want to do. And I've always been driven by everything that touches people overall. I think I express it through my work and through my activism with climate change, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this. But I've always wanted, I think, to have connection with people and make sure people around me are good, and through my own adventure, you know. So I guess my mission would be to. That's a very good question. I think
we can circle back to it at the end.
Yeah. Okay. We can circle back then. We can
put a pin on that for now. And I think it will probably unravel after the questions that we're going to explore today. I'm really intrigued with activism, because I think when a layperson thinks of activism, they think of advocacy, they think of people going on the streets and feeling very passionate about an issue and spreading awareness about that issue, empowerment. Why did you choose activism as one of your life's goals and pursuits?
I think it's important to be passionate about whatever topic you have, and if you have the power to voice it out, it's always the best option, right? And I think what is very interesting with activism is that there's a lot of stereotypes that goes with activism.
Yes.
And we usually think of, you know, the people in the street, of course, which is one part of activism, but we don't necessarily think of the change that they bring. And often they have this stereotype of home wrecker, which is not always the case. And it's important for especially young people to have a voice when we think of the future of, you know, our island or just our world in general. So I think why did I choose activism per se is because I wanted, I think, first of all, to represent young Mauritian people in spaces where they are not necessarily invited to. And yeah, I think that's the main part of it. It's really to make sure we're heard in a way that is acceptable at the same level as people that are making the decisions as well, but not necessarily in a way that is, you know, trying to shake everything up and make sure that, you know, just come here and say everything that you're doing is bad. I don't think about this way, but more of, okay, thank you for all of what you are doing. I think I have something to bring to the table, and I'm sure that I can bring it, not necessarily by wrecking the door or just anything very reckless that is stereotyped with activism, but just overall in general, let's discuss and make sure that everyone is included at the table. But I'm young, it can be women, it can be any kind of minorities per se. that needs to be heard when we're making a lot of decisions for our future.
Do you feel the activism that you've done so far, and we're going to talk about climate change in a minute, but do you feel heard? Do you think people take you seriously when you bring your thoughts, your ideas to the table?
It's a hard journey. You don't necessarily feel heard at first. I think with experience, you kind of understand how to balance the etiquette of, oh, I am an activist and I'm more than just an activist. I have solutions, you know. I've spoken with someone when I was at COP in Egypt, and he told me that he saw a lot of the statements that I was making, but the only problem is that you don't put out solutions.
Right.
And you know, it's like, okay, thank you for shouting, but if you just shout without bringing any solutions, you're just someone that shouts, and there's nothing that we're going to do about it, because your message won't be heard, or at least won't be taken as seriously as it should be. So I think the more you progress, the more you start putting your voice out, the more you speak with people, the more they want to hear about you, but you have to be ready to be heard as well. So there's a lot of preparation with it. There's a lot of, here's what I'm thinking, I saw this report, this is out. And you know, there's a lot of things you can do to arrive to this point. Critical thinking is very important. Making sure that you yourself, you know who you are as well. Because when you speak with, you know, maybe a minister or the ambassador of the European Union, you have to make sure that you're very comfortable with yourself to make sure that your message is heard very, very clearly. So it's a process. I'm not there yet. Hopefully it will happen.
But you've done amazing things so far. And let's talk about climate change, because this is something that I think concerns all of us. Some of us, I think, feel this sense of urgency more than others, and particularly the youth. I see that more amongst the youth because it is here and now. I think when I was growing up, and I'm going to betray my age here, but when I was growing up, I don't think anyone was even thinking about basic things like recycling, that I think the youth of today do incorporate it in their everyday life. Why climate change?
I think when I grew up, I was very inspired by a lot of very powerful social activist leaders. So I was reading a lot about Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela and what he did in his own country. And I was always very intrigued by political science, by international relations. And when I decided to major in political science and what I did, I also had this cause that I wanted to bring to the table, and I thought of Mauritius, and I thought of Mauritius being an island, a very small island, polluting at 0.001%, and all of the injustice that comes with climate change when we think of the biggest polluters, and when I think that all of what they are doing, we are going to be the ones suffering from it. I think everything made sense from my own fight, what I wanted to bring out to the world, coming back to the mission part, and I think it just clicked. There's a lot of things around climate change. We think about recycling, we think about biodiversity, but I think we often forget that it's all about the people at the end, and they are the one that will be the most touched, and Mauritius is one of the countries which will be the most touched, and no one is speaking about it. So I think this is where I saw a gap, and I wanted to voice out my truth and what I think was important. So hence why climate, and then so on and so forth, and then here we are now.
The rest is history, and the future is still to come. And I think one of the things that I found quite shocking, and you're right, I don't think many people know about that, is the plight of the small island developing states. As you said, we contribute the least to it, and yet we're the most vulnerable. When we think about the Maldives, for example, we don't know how much, we're talking about. We're not talking about in 1,000 years. We're talking about in a very near future. I don't know whether you were in Mauritius when the cyclone Bilal hit and the flooding that came from that. The thing that I find scary is the future is here already. We're already seeing some of the effects of it. So does it scare you?
It does. It does scare me. I think, you know what scares me the most is not taking the precautions while we can take the precautions, and just, we're just waiting. It's kind of like COVID. I always think about COVID. COVID hit, and all of the countries around the world decided in maybe like 1 week or 2 weeks to do quarantine and all that kind of stuff. I think it's kind of like we are looking at a tsunami from afar. We know it's coming, but it's not coming yet. So we can look another way for now because it's still not that urgent, but it is becoming more urgent, more urgent, more urgent. So,
Of course.
yeah, and also something you mentioned about Cyclone Bilal, and I think it's super interesting to see how people are united when something comes around any kind of environment issues. We had it here in Mauritius with the Wakashio, and
Exactly.
all this movement was amazing, right? People were reunited, and it's really good. So, there's this kind of momentum that we have to seize and make sure that, we go all the way to policy making, policy change, changing the decisions. And it's really hard right now. But a lot of countries like the Maldives, when they have this urgency right now, I'm a lot of the time reading about their action plans, action plans of small island developing states in comparison to action plans of polluting countries with not that urgency. And when you read the action plans, it's so interesting to see that you can feel that there is power within the people when talking about the Maldives. They are talking about their children, their women. They're talking about we need to do this and that and that and that. While, for example, polluting countries will talk about how we can, innovate and make sure that seize the opportunity of climate change to make maybe a little bit more money. Yeah, just make a little bit more money. So it's so interesting. And just looking a little bit around the world, how we perceive climate change really depends on the urgency that comes with it.
And I think that one of the things that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the reasons why the result or outcome of COP29 was so mixed was, I think, this feeling that the small island developing states weren't being taken very seriously, or that they weren't getting or they would not get the help that they desperately need. What is your feeling from how would you say COP29 was a success or a failure?
It's always a failure. It's always a failure.
Disappointing.
It's always disappointing because it depends on the perspective, right? You have this tsunami, once again, you have it. Why are we not taking the right actions at the right time to make sure that the tsunami is not a tsunami anymore, So every time we go to COP, every time there's the same battle of who's making money with climate change, who are benefiting from this chaos, really, and who are the persecuted. Me thinking of my future, of maybe my future kids, my future generations, of course it's always going to be a failure because I cannot, and this is more than just activism, it's just maybe values that I have in me, I don't know. I cannot possibly understand how we put money over people. It's crazy to me that we're still thinking about how one person can get richer by the minute while 1 million people are struggling every day because of climate change. So for me, it's always a failure. And until we take the right actions, countries are taking the right actions and committing to 5-year, 10-year plans with concrete, monitoring and evaluation, making sure every year we have targets, progress, and all that kind of stuff, it's always going to be a failure. And for now, we're all looking at the news right now, and it's very hard politically speaking.
Yeah.
So we're clearly not there yet. So it's kind of hard.
Has there been any COP that you think not was a success, but was more hopeful than others?
There was one.
Paris?
Yes, I was going to talk about Paris because I think every country in the world kind of decided to take action, and we are still having all of the repercussions of the actions that were taken on this summit. So I think it was really a first step towards it. We had a goal, making sure that global warming doesn't go above 2 degrees. We're aiming for 1.5. We're still within reach, but it's very hard. But it set targets, which is a first very good step. So that was a good one. Yeah. It was a good one.
Yay! So, and that was how long ago? Remind me.
10 years ago now.
10 years ago.
2015. Yeah.
So fast forward 10 years, I think one of the things that I've heard you talk about in your TEDx talk was the generation gap. And I think some of the issues, not all, but some of the issues that you are talking about probably stem from that generation gap, because there seem to be different priorities. When you talk about a 15-year-old or 24-year-old versus a 60-year-old, I think there are different senses of urgencies among the two groups. How do you bridge that gap?
It's very interesting because we often think of division as a weakness. And I honestly don't really understand why. For me, when I'm speaking with someone 50, 60 years old, and he's telling me his perspective on things, I'm very, I wouldn't say grateful, but I'm very intrigued at how he's speaking about climate change towards me and how we can, add up what we're thinking. It's not necessarily a subtraction, it's always an addition. So I think how we can bridge that gap is, first of all, about mindsets. I think it's mindsets. You have to understand that the person in front of you has its own perspective, you have your own. If you are closed within your own mindset, nothing is going to happen. And this works for the older generation and the young generation. It's not because we're young that we're always right. And I guess that's one of my fight as well, to make sure that, it's not black or white. It's kind of always gray. And if it's gray, we can advance. That's amazing. Young people have a lot of energy and passion, which is so good. And we do have a lot of passion, but maybe sometimes passion doesn't necessarily translate into the right action and commitments. Like I was saying before, if I'm shouting and if I'm saying, this is not good, but I'm not bringing any solutions to the table, I'm not as efficient as I could be. While maybe someone from an older generation won't have the passion, but will have some solutions, right? So I think at the end of the day, to bridge the gap, we have to look right in the eyes, say that I have maybe a part of the solution, you might have a part of the solution, and why not just join forces together? Sometimes cooperation is the best way to think of progress.
You've been involved in a number of initiatives, and have you been involved in one or more initiatives where you have seen that this type of collaboration is possible?
Yes. I think there are two parts. The first one, I think, working with a lot of international organizations, they do want to include youth, and it's amazing. I think now the question is, it seems like we're asking a lot, but it's very important that we don't do youth tokenism. And it's very, very important, because sometimes I've been invited to events or
just to tick a box,
organizations just to tick a box, and you can feel it, you can sense that you're here because, well, you have to be here, right?
We're not really interested.
You're
in
not
what you
really
have to
here to be,
right.
At the same table as the person that will decide. But on the contrary, there are various organizations that really make sure that your voice stands out as equal as maybe another person in the room, right? I've been part of the Climate Overshoot Commission. To talk a little bit about this, the Overshoot Commission is a commission of former prime ministers, ministers of environment, presidents. I think there were maybe like 10 people.
Oh, wow.
10,
across the globe.
Across the globe. And they decided to select 6 young people from around the world to advise them. So we were kind of like this youth advisory board.
Right.
The goal of this commission was to create a report about how to mitigate global emissions, right? And throughout this experience, I've seen some of these commissioners being really, really nice with us, being really, okay, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Even if we didn't have the technicalities of it, we still had the chance to put our thoughts on the table. We created our own report. We've traveled with them to Nairobi to discuss with a lot of different people. I've traveled with them to New York as well to meet some of the UNDP's, some of UN organization high level people there. You can sense when they want to include you in a very genuine way. So this is really good.
So you didn't feel in relation to this commission, even though they were former world leaders, you felt they were genuinely interested in what you had to say?
So yeah, A lot of them. We're really nice with them. I still have contact with them sometimes,
Brilliant.
which is really good. At some point, I think you just stop thinking of this youth etiquette that someone might have,
Sure.
and you just try and speak as someone that has some ideas. And I think when you get off all of the labels and you really think of the nitty-gritty part of how we can progress, age doesn't matter. And it's just about ideas and how we can progress at the end. So.
And ultimately, this planet belongs to all of us, regardless of age, regardless of race, of sex, of whether you're 80 years old or 20 years old. It concerns all of us. And I think related to that is the idea of interconnectivity that I briefly spoke about before we were recording, that people, I think, has put climate change in a particular box. And maybe it's part of the education process where they perhaps don't realize that it's related to other issues, or the effects of climate change could directly impact other areas such as food, water, poverty. How do you, and I know that you co-founded an NGO in Mauritius to deal with some of these issues. So can you demystify for us how climate change is and should be related to these other urgent issues? And if we don't look after and try to mitigate the effects of climate change, how it could be a catastrophe in other areas as well?
And it's very true. I think we often talk about climate change as one specific topic, while you can see it a little bit everywhere, right? And I know there is this climate fresque. It's called La Fresque du Climat in French. And they kind of explain from the beginnings of what climate change is all the way to all of the different impacts that it can have. Right. So I'm not going to do the whole climate fresque thing, but when global warming is coming up, it has some impact on, of course, our oceans, but also on food and agriculture. Farmers have to modify their crops, how they're doing things. It can go all the way to, yes, like I said, ocean. I think it is a little bit everywhere when you think about it. It has some very short-term impact, which we think about a lot, and it has some longer-term impacts and then some intergenerational impacts like inequity. Let's put an example, right? You are in Mauritius and you are in a, let's say, relatively poor household, right? You have a storm coming up, your house is getting flooded, and now all of a sudden you have to, first of all, rebuild your house, but second of all, maybe your child cannot necessarily go to school, and then it impacts education. You have to maybe migrate somewhere else. You have to there's a lot of different things, and it's all coming from, like I said, climate. And actually, great link with my second point on NGOs, which is I saw that while creating the NGO, while helping a lot of different families, when Cyclone Belal hit, Mauritius is kind of hard because we are a small island state, but we do have a lot of economic power, so we have a lot of houses that are built really well, but you can see that whenever there's a storm, it's nearly impossible to drive or all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of progress to do, and we often don't think about the families that are poor and really are impacted a lot with any kind of heavy rain that is happening. So when I was doing when I created my NGO and when I went on the ground, I saw all of these kind of effects right next to me, really. So we often don't think about it because we don't see it.
Yes, exactly. And I think because we've come such a long way, in a way we have a much larger section of the population that's middle income now, I think we tend to forget what we don't see. We think, these things happen in mainland continental Africa, for example, whereas there are so many people who are still in deep poverty, and you see you see these things where there are cyclones and all of that. But when you when you went on the ground and were in touch with people here, did you feel the youth feel concerned about climate change? Do they know what it is?
I think they do. I really think they do. I'm working with the European delegation right now, as the European delegation created what is called the Youth Sounding Board, where they not necessarily invited, but they took 26 young people to help them discuss and shape the next 2 years of their mandate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, And I'm very grateful to be the chairman of this cohort
Founding
of
board,
young people,
yeah,
you know.
amazing.
And you would not imagine how concerned and innovative and passionate in the greatest sense possible these young people are.
So what age group are we talking about here?
So we're talking, I hope I'm not the oldest. We're talking 18 to maybe 26, maybe. But the majority are between 18 to 21, I would say.
Okay, so they've just finished school, they're either at uni or just finished uni. Yeah.
Or just starting a new job, or yeah. And it's amazing. You know, so sometimes you speak with them and they have this project going on, this initiative going on. They're maybe traveling to represent Mauritius in another country. Just recently, one of how do you say, participant, one of our young people went to have a talk with a minister very recently, you know, so they're making change happen, and they are very proactive in the best way possible, because I don't think we have necessarily the right platform to voice out here in Mauritius, and it's something that we need to create by ourselves, and it's very hard, but we're doing the best that we can to make it happen.
With the resources that you
have. With the resources that we have, and with the resources that the institutions are giving us as well. So they're very amazing, and I think a lot of young people, especially at university, when they're talking, it's just amazing, and you have to hear them and just see how passionate they can be. You know, it's amazing. It's really amazing.
That's brilliant. And I always think back, as I was mentioning to you, this is my third year participating as a jury in Débat Climat, which is an inter-college debate in Creole on climate change issues, and I'm always flabbergasted by the level, the quality, the maturity. I don't think when I was their age we had that. Of course, technology has helped a lot. We have access to a lot more resources that we did back in my days. But I find it so inspiring, because it gives me hope for the future. And I think we do need to have this sense of hope that it's all not doom and gloom and this dystopian world that we're heading into.
Of course. And you know, I think young people, they just have this hope that change is possible.
Yeah.
While maybe, you know, when you grow up, and I'm gonna be very honest, I'm growing up as well. I just started a new job, and you know, when life comes at you, maybe you don't think about change as necessarily as before.
Sure.
And you know, you get caught up with all different things of maybe more responsibilities. I mean, I'm talking like I'm very old, but it's very true.
Yeah.
And you know, they just keep you on your toes, I think, and it's so important, you know, and it's very good. It should be good, you know. This activism lens sometimes is really good. They make sure that, you know, when you have a political speech, you said something, so you better do it.
Yeah,
and it's so good.
Talk. Yeah,
it's so good. I think it's super important.
Yeah, it keeps you honest. It makes you accountable. And talking about accountability, we have the budget coming up in a few weeks. The national budget. If you had, you know, genie out of the bottle, one wish that you would like to see, money not being an issue, that you would like to see government implement in terms of climate change, what would it be for Mauritius?
I think we are developing really fast. It's a fact. I think the main issue that we're having here in Mauritius is that we're too close-minded in developing ourselves in a Western perspective. We want to open up malls, we want to open up, you know, a lot of different buildings, but we're not necessarily thinking about our own origins when we're developing, right? I'm often thinking of, for example, Singapore, who developed itself really fast with a really great economic growth, but they did it their way in how they developed their architecture, their institutions, and they made sure that what they were doing is not necessarily copying, Europe, for example, because they did this, so we have to do this. It's, okay, we have our island, let's make sure that the next building that we're creating is sustainable. You know, it has green spaces around, you know, just have a thought of how can we as Mauritius can develop ourselves in a way that is resembling us. So, and here we can implement climate change, right? So we can think of, you know, we have a lot of heavy rains, we have a lot of cyclones. Let's make sure that we put a lot of budget in disaster early warning systems.
Yeah.
or disaster risk reduction, make sure that any kind of people around are safe and sound, and all of this different kind of thing. I think we just have to have a little bit of an internal thought on how we want to develop ourselves as an economic powerhouse in Africa, but also as a small island state, vulnerable to climate change. We have a lot of different tools, but we can seize all of what is happening to make a force out of it. And I don't think we thought about it too much yet.
Yes, and I think it leads to well, we have a new government, so we're hopeful that there will be a sort of fresh breath. And I'm politically neutral, but I think change from time to time is always good to see things from a different perspective. One of the things that I have been talking about with a few people as well, and I think there are some players doing that already, is circular economy, which helps us keeping things sustainable. We, as a small island, we're in the middle of the Indian Ocean. There is so much we import. There is so much wastage. Little things like that, I think, could go a very long way. There are some small companies doing circular activities, but I think these are the kind of things that we should be thinking
Of course,
about.
I'm 100% agreeing, because it's maybe a parenthesis, but there are a lot of young people who are doing a lot in terms of circular economy and just spreading a message of recycling and climate change. I don't think they have, unfortunately, a lot of power. Sometimes bottom-up decisions are not always the best, especially when it comes to recycling. And sometimes you have to do top to bottom and just implement something. And I think it would be so great if the government that we're having right now, they could, from the most policy-wise level, implement some kind of policies where, circular economy is kind of being normalized, really, at the end of the day. I'm always thinking about, I don't have the word in English, but
That's okay.
when...
You can say it in French.
Ok. Non, par exemple, les bouteilles en verre, if we bring it back to any kind of supermarket, you gain a little bit of money, right?
That's what used to happen when I was growing up. So we had all these little Sprite, Coca-Cola, all these little bottles, and we used to save them, and then you return them to the supermarket and get some money.
And it's so funny because at the end of the day, it forces you to not, throw it, waste, and it's so simple. And people I'm so sure it would be one of the greatest ideas here in Mauritius.
Yeah.
And just with a little incentive,
Yeah.
I am so sure it can happen.
Yeah. As you said, some smaller entities are already doing it. I drink a lot of kombucha, and that's how they do it. So they give you the bottle with the kombucha, and then when you're ready to reorder, you just give the empty bottles back, and then they'll just refill it. Yeah.
It's all these little things where the population can see an incentive, can see why I'm doing this, that it works. And I think we need to stop always thinking about recycling as, something that is not necessary. And I think people, at the end of the day, they need sometimes some financial incentives. And let's put it on the table. If we do have a limited budget.
Yes. Let's
assume. Do this. Let's do this.
Yes, great idea. Last question. We'll come back to the mission as the last question, but a penultimate question. You grew up in you spent a large part of your life in France. You studied in Canada in a very prestigious university. Why did you decide to come back here?
I think my heart is in Mauritius, first of all.
Really?
And I just love it here. And to me, when I was in France, I think that it's a lot about identity and not about crisis, but like identity overall.
Sure.
My family is in Mauritius. I grew up in France, but I feel like my story and my history is in Mauritius, right? So we are in a time in history where Mauritius is developing a lot. And I feel like I want to be part of this history.
Oh, that's lovely.
And I genuinely think maybe I hope it's not arrogance, because I don't think, but I want to be part of this development, and I'm sure I can bring something to the table. So I want to stay here. I want to develop things. I want to make sure I speak with everyone. I want to make sure that at some point in my life, I am able to make some kind of decisions that are impactful for not only me, but my family, my close relationship, my close circle, my city, and at the end of the day, my island. It's so interesting, and if I can give a message is like, you know, young people, they want to move out, they want to see the world, and it's amazing, and please go. But at the same time,
come back.
It's good to come back to,
Yeah.
you know, take what you see from the outside, you know, learn as much as you can. But there's so much to develop here, and it's such a great opportunity that I just want to be here and be part of this story.
That's amazing to hear. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. So would you say part of your mission would therefore be leaving a legacy for your country?
I mean, I really hope, but it's.
I don't think it's aiming too high. I think it's just you want to make a difference, and it's inspiring to have people like you. I don't think you should be ashamed of that or feel you're being arrogant or anything.
I mean, thank you, because I do want to leave a legacy if I can, and I wish I can. I'm working towards it. You know, I think everything is sometimes strategic, and I'm trying to implement a little bit of here, a little bit of that, and maybe at some point someday I'll do another interview in maybe 10 years.
Yes.
We're crossing fingers, and you know, we can come back to it and say, okay, maybe I did a couple of things. So I hope I can keep the good work, and you know, be as good as possible for, you know, my closest circle to the whole island. So yes, I hope my mission is this. I'm crossing fingers that I can make it happen.
I'm sure, and you're so humble, and thank you for your candor, and keep shining a light on all these very important issues that I think we can all learn from. I mentioned to you, I did an interview this morning when I said that I do believe in the top-down approach, but at the same time, I don't think the youth should feel that because I'm young, I don't have a voice, and it's important that you're bringing your voice to
Exactly, yeah. And you know, it's very new to have youth activism here in Mauritius, and I do hope as well that through my story, where I was not necessarily the one meant to voice out our problem, other young people would be able to look at me and be like, okay, he tried, and it's hard. Clearly, it's very hard, but it's something, or some things are happening at some points. So I hope that young people can see, I guess, my story as a blueprint, and make sure that, you know, they can do better than me. I strongly hope they can do better than me, talk with a lot more people than I did, and make the best changes possible. At least there's a first step, and you know, I'll continue to fight it, make sure everything is happening at the best pace possible, and so that younger generation can do even better than me. Can carry on, and I hope go even higher than me.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, you.
Thank you for having me. It was great.